Monday mornings at Stonebridge Marketing Solutions always carried the same tense atmosphere. Employees hurried through the glass doors with coffee in one hand and laptops in the other, careful not to arrive even a minute late. The company had earned a reputation as one of the city's fastest-growing marketing firms. But behind its polished image was a culture built on pressure, impossible deadlines, and constant fear. At the center of it all stood CEO Richard Collins, a man who believed respect was earned through intimidation rather than leadership. Emma Carter had spent the last 7 years giving everything she had to the company. She was often the first to arrive and the last to leave. She had missed birthdays, postponed vacations, and even delayed planning her wedding because every important project seemed to require another late night at the office. Despite her dedication, she never complained. She genuinely believed that hard work would eventually be rewarded. Her campaigns had generated millions in revenue, brought in prestigious clients, and helped establish Stonebridge as an industry leader. She wasn't just another employee. She had become one of the company's strongest assets. That Monday began like every other, until an email instructed every employee to attend an emergency staff meeting in the main conference room. More than 40 people gathered around the long glass table, whispering to each other about what could be so urgent. Emma assumed it would be another strategy discussion, or perhaps the announcement of a new client. Instead, she noticed Richard standing unusually still at the front of the room, with a folder tucked beneath his arm. His expression revealed nothing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice calm but cold. "Before we discuss today's agenda, we need to address a serious problem." The room immediately fell silent. Richard clicked the projector remote, displaying disappointing sales numbers from the company's latest campaign. "This campaign failed to meet expectations," he said. "Someone has to take responsibility." Emma studied the screen. She recognized the project immediately. She had designed the original strategy, but most of her recommendations had been removed after management slashed the budget and altered the target audience. She expected Richard to discuss improvements for future campaigns. Instead, he slowly turned toward her. "The person responsible," he said loudly, "is Emma Carter." Dozens of heads turned at once. Emma blinked in disbelief. "Richard, with respect, that's not accurate. The final campaign was completely different from the proposal my team submitted." Richard raised his hand to silence her. "No excuses." She remained composed. "The creative department warned management that removing half the advertising budget would reduce performance. We documented every concern." "I said no excuses." The atmosphere became painfully uncomfortable. Emma could feel every eye fixed on her. Some coworkers looked shocked. Others lowered their heads, unwilling to witness what was happening. A few exchanged nervous glances but remained silent. Nobody dared challenge the CEO. Richard stepped closer. "For months, I've watched your performance decline." Emma couldn't believe what she was hearing. "My performance has never declined." "You've become comfortable," Richard continued. "You've lost your competitive edge, and frankly, you're no longer an asset to this company." Emma knew every statement was false. Her performance reviews had always been exceptional. She had recently secured one of the company's biggest accounts. This wasn't about performance. Richard simply needed someone to blame for a failed executive decision. She took a slow breath. "If you want to discuss my employment, let's do it privately." Richard smiled, enjoying every second of the moment.
"No, everyone deserves to see what happens when someone fails to deliver." He reached into the folder and placed a termination letter on the conference table. "Effective immediately." He paused dramatically. "You're fired." A heavy silence filled the room. Emma stared at the envelope without touching it. 7 years of loyalty had ended with a single sentence spoken in front of everyone she worked beside. She expected at least one manager to object. None did. Her closest coworkers avoided eye contact. Fear had stolen their voices. Richard folded his arms. "Security will escort you out." Emma slowly picked up the envelope. Her hands trembled, but she refused to let anyone see how deeply she had been hurt. She gathered her notebook and quietly walked toward her office. Every step felt heavier than the last. She packed the few personal belongings she had accumulated over 7 years: a framed photograph of her parents, a small cactus that had survived countless late nights, and a ceramic mug given to her by her team after completing a major project. As she placed the last item into a cardboard box, she looked around the office one final time. Countless memories filled the room: successful presentations, celebrations with coworkers, and nights spent chasing impossible deadlines. None of it mattered anymore. As she reached the elevator, Richard called after her. "Oh, Emma." She turned without saying a word. "I hope you've saved enough money." A few uncomfortable laughs echoed from the hallway. Emma simply smiled. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was the smile of someone making a silent promise. She stepped into the elevator without another word. The doors closed. Only then did a single tear roll down her cheek. That evening, she sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by the contents of the cardboard box. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from coworkers apologizing for what had happened. Every message carried the same regret. "I wanted to speak up, but I was afraid." Emma didn't blame them. She understood fear better than anyone. After hours of staring at her resume, she suddenly closed the document. She had spent 7 years building someone else's dream. Maybe it was finally time to build her own. She opened a new browser tab instead of another job application. Within minutes, she registered the name of her own marketing agency. As the confirmation email arrived, she whispered to herself, "You'll never humiliate me again." Outside, the city lights flickered through her apartment window. Emma had no idea how difficult the road ahead would be.
But somewhere across town, Richard Collins had no idea that firing the most talented employee in his company would become the biggest mistake of his entire career. The first morning after registering her company, Emma Carter woke before sunrise. There was no office waiting for her, no assistant organizing her schedule, and no guaranteed paycheck arriving at the end of the month. Her dining table had become her desk. Her living room had become a meeting space, and every dollar she had saved over the last 7 years was now her only safety net. Looking around her small apartment, she knew she had two choices: give in to fear or prove that Richard Collins had made the biggest mistake of his career. She chose the second. Every day started at 5 in the morning and often ended well after midnight. Emma designed branding for her new agency, built a professional website, created marketing materials, and reached out to every business owner she had worked with over the years. She didn't criticize her former employer or tell anyone how she had been fired. Instead, she simply introduced herself as someone launching a new agency, built on honesty, creativity, and genuine partnerships. Her professionalism impressed people far more than any revenge story ever could. The first response came 3 days later. A small family-owned furniture company replied to her email, asking if she could handle their digital advertising campaign. It wasn't a massive contract, but Emma treated it as if she had just signed a global corporation. She spent days researching their customers, understanding their products, and developing a customized strategy. Within a month, their online sales nearly doubled. The owner called her personally. "Emma," he said excitedly, "you're the first marketing consultant who actually listened to us. We'd like to sign a 1-year contract." Emma smiled as she hung up the phone. It wasn't just her first long-term client. It was proof that her business could survive. Satisfied clients began recommending her agency to others. One business owner told another, who introduced her to 3 more. Slowly but steadily, Emma's calendar filled with meetings. Soon she realized she couldn't manage everything alone. Her first hire was Olivia, a talented graphic designer who had recently been laid off from another agency. Emma remembered how hopeless unemployment could feel. So instead of offering the lowest salary possible, she paid Olivia fairly and gave her complete creative freedom. "I hired you because I trust your talent," Emma told her on the first day. "You don't need to ask permission to have great ideas." Olivia smiled. "No boss has ever said that to me." Within weeks, Emma hired a copywriter, a social media strategist, and a web developer. Her tiny apartment office became too crowded, so she rented a modest workspace downtown. It wasn't luxurious, but every employee felt respected. There were no public humiliations, no shouting during meetings, and no impossible deadlines created just to satisfy someone's ego. The company culture Emma built became just as attractive as the quality of the agency's work. Meanwhile, things inside Stonebridge Marketing Solutions were beginning to change. Richard Collins believed replacing Emma would be easy. It wasn't. The employee promoted to take over her position struggled immediately. Several major campaigns missed deadlines. Clients who had worked directly with Emma started asking uncomfortable questions. "Where's Emma? When is she coming back? We'd prefer to continue working with her." Richard dismissed every concern. "She's no longer with the company." Some clients accepted the answer. Others quietly began searching for her online. It didn't take long before they discovered Emma's new agency. One by one, they contacted her. Emma never asked them to leave Stonebridge. She simply presented her ideas, explained her process, and promised to deliver results. Her honesty spoke louder than aggressive sales pitches ever could. Within 2 months, 5 of Stonebridge's biggest clients had signed contracts with Emma's growing agency. Richard was furious. During another executive meeting, he slammed a financial report onto the conference table. "Why are we losing clients?" he demanded. The room remained silent. Finally, one manager spoke carefully. Most of them specifically requested Emma. Richard's face darkened. "Then convince them to stay." "We tried." "Offer discounts." "We already have." "What did they say?" The manager hesitated. "They said they trust Emma more than they trust Stonebridge." For the first time in years, Richard had no answer. At Emma's office, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Employees laughed together during lunch breaks. Ideas were welcomed instead of criticized. Mistakes became opportunities to learn instead of excuses for public embarrassment. One Friday afternoon, Olivia knocked gently on Emma's office door. "You should see this." Emma looked up from her laptop. Olivia handed her a business magazine. Across the front page was a headline that made Emma freeze. "New agency challenges industry giant after explosive growth." The article praised Emma's innovative campaigns, ethical leadership, and impressive client retention. It even mentioned how several respected businesses had voluntarily moved their accounts from Stonebridge to her agency because they valued personal relationships over corporate bureaucracy. Emma closed the magazine without celebrating. Success had never been about humiliating Richard. It had always been about proving that kindness, integrity, and hard work could build something stronger than fear ever could. Across town, however, Richard Collins stared at his company's declining revenue reports. Investors were asking difficult questions. Profits were shrinking, employees were resigning, and competitors were gaining ground. The empire he had spent years building was beginning to crack. Late that evening, Richard received devastating news. Stonebridge had lost its largest client, a contract worth millions of dollars. The client had signed with Emma Carter. Richard leaned back in his chair, unable to believe what he was reading. For the first time in his career, he realized he hadn't lost business to a competitor. He had created his own. And unless something changed soon, the woman he had publicly humiliated only 3 months earlier was about to become the most successful entrepreneur in the entire industry. 3 months after Emma Carter walked out of Stonebridge Marketing Solutions carrying nothing but a cardboard box, everything had changed. The small apartment where she had launched her dream was now just a memory. Her agency occupied an entire floor of a modern office building overlooking the city skyline. The reception area buzzed with energy as clients arrived for meetings, designers collaborated on new campaigns, and employees laughed together between projects. The atmosphere was everything Emma had once wished for during her years at Stonebridge: professional, respectful, and built on trust rather than fear. The agency's success had exceeded every expectation. More than 20 businesses had signed long-term contracts. Industry magazines praised Emma's innovative leadership. Several former Stonebridge employees had resigned and joined her team, saying they wanted to work somewhere they felt valued instead of intimidated. Emma welcomed each of them without asking a single question about Richard. She never encouraged anyone to leave their old jobs. People simply followed the leader they respected. One Tuesday morning, Emma was reviewing a presentation when her assistant, Olivia, knocked gently on her office door. "You have a visitor." Emma looked up. "Do I have an appointment?" Olivia hesitated. "No." "Who is it?" Olivia took a slow breath. "It's Richard Collins." The room became silent. For a brief moment, Emma remembered the conference room, the termination letter, the embarrassed faces of her coworkers, and the sound of Richard saying, "I hope you've saved enough money." She closed the file on her laptop. "Send him in." A few seconds later, the office door opened. Richard stepped inside. Emma almost didn't recognize him. The confident executive who had once filled every room with arrogance now looked exhausted. His expensive suit was wrinkled, dark circles surrounded his eyes, and his shoulders no longer carried the confidence of someone who believed he was untouchable. For several uncomfortable seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Richard broke the silence. "You've done well." Emma nodded politely. "Thank you." Richard glanced around the office. "It's impressive. I've worked hard." "I can see that." Another silence followed. The roles had completely reversed. Months earlier, Richard had stood over Emma believing he controlled her future. Now he stood in her office searching for words. "I'll be honest," he finally admitted. "Stonebridge is in serious trouble." Emma listened quietly. "We've lost clients." "I know." "We've lost senior staff." "I heard." "Our investors are threatening to pull out." Emma remained calm. Richard swallowed his pride. "I need your help." The words hung heavily in the air. The same man who had humiliated her before 40 employees was now asking the woman he had fired to save his company. Emma leaned back in her chair. "What exactly are you asking?" Richard took a deep breath. "I want to merge our companies." Emma raised an eyebrow. "You want me to save Stonebridge?" "Yes." "And why would I do that?" Richard looked down at the floor. "Because you're the only person capable of fixing what I broke." For the first time since entering the room, Emma saw genuine regret in his eyes. Richard continued quietly. "I spent years believing people were replaceable. I thought fear created loyalty. I was wrong. I didn't lose clients because of bad marketing. I lost them because they trusted you, not me." Emma folded her hands. "Do you know what hurt the most?" Richard remained silent. "It wasn't losing my job. It wasn't the paycheck. It wasn't even being blamed for something I didn't do." She looked directly into his eyes. "It was being humiliated in front of people I'd spent 7 years working beside." Richard slowly nodded. "I know. I've thought about that day every single morning. I'm sorry." The apology sounded sincere, but Emma had learned something important during the previous 3 months. Some wounds heal, others simply become lessons. She stood and walked toward the large office window overlooking the city. For several seconds, she watched people moving through the streets below. Then she turned back. "I won't merge with Stonebridge." Richard lowered his head. "I understand." "But," he looked up, "I am willing to buy your company." Richard stared in disbelief. Emma continued. "Every employee keeps their job. No layoffs. No public humiliation. No toxic culture. Your clients receive uninterrupted service. And every person working there gets the respect they should have received years ago." Richard slowly realized what she was offering. She wasn't destroying Stonebridge. She was saving the innocent people who still worked there. "What about me?" he asked quietly. Emma smiled gently. "I don't think you're the right fit for my company." Richard let out a soft laugh. It wasn't bitter, it was acceptance. He nodded. "I suppose I deserved that." "You deserved a chance to learn." "And I think you have." A month later, the acquisition was finalized. Stonebridge Marketing Solutions officially became part of Emma's growing agency. Employees kept their positions. Clients remained loyal. The toxic management practices disappeared overnight. As for Richard Collins, he quietly stepped away from the business world. Before leaving, He sent a handwritten letter to every former employee, accepting responsibility for the culture he had created, and thanking Emma for protecting the people he had failed to lead. On the first anniversary of her company, Emma stood before more than 100 employees gathered in the same conference room where they celebrated another year of success. She smiled and said, "A great company isn't built by making people fear coming to work. It's built by making them proud to belong." The room erupted in applause. Emma looked around at the faces smiling back at her. 1 year earlier, she had walked out of another office carrying a cardboard box. Today, she stood in front of a company built on respect, kindness, and opportunity. Richard Collins had once believed firing Emma Carter would erase her future. Instead, it became the moment that created it. In the end, Emma discovered the most satisfying revenge wasn't making her former boss fail. It was becoming so successful that he had no choice but to recognize the value he had thrown away. And that success spoke louder than revenge ever could.